You all ready?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. I believe this is episode 18, and this is officially the first episode of the second season of the forum. So I wanted to mention that. I have two wonderful guests with me today. I have a person, Jacob. He's with us, goes by Marxist Saul. We're going to use that name because this is going to be a creation of a media outlet that we maybe will talk about towards the end of the interview. And we're also rejoined by Jay Carico. As you all know, Jay has a band called Sound Bandits. And since the last time we interviewed, there have been some major developments with his radio program, and I think Jay is going to talk a little bit more about that circumstance. Jay also had a book that was published, I believe, in 2019. If Voices Were Fire, um, interviews from the Agents of Change. It's really a series of interviews talking about different political ideologies, namely anarchisms, and different ways to kind of combat sectarianism and different issues that maybe result from having lots of people together to come up with strategies and stuff as far as improving the world and the quality of life that we have in front of us. We have a lot to talk about. Welcome to the show, you all, and thanks for the invitation and acceptance again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And so I want to get this started. This is going to be a very informal type of interview, I think. I don't want it to be too like terminological over people's heads, even though we will get into the weeds some. My audience wants to learn. They want to learn more about philosophies to sort of question their worldview. And so I think that ultimately is going to be a great thing, but we can break it down into terms to where a larger audience may be able to dissect and even develop some of their own ideologies and learn along the way. So that's what we want to do, is build a community here on the forum so people can just be more educated in general. I wanted to give a plug into the pod before we start. Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum at the end of 2022 was ranked in the top 5% internationally when it came to audience reach. And so we have an audience base of 23 different countries. And the goal is to get to 100 different countries by the end of 2023, which shows that the forum is really growing. People are spreading the word and the message. This is not monetized at all. I haven't accepted any money yet. If people do want to donate, I'm open to that. The links are there on the channels, but it's not really the primary objective of this channel. It's really just to educate people. And this is my sort of way of giving back to the community, to the public, just so we can be well-informed citizens and maybe we can respect each other a little bit more than we did the day before. I wanted to talk some about indigenous communities and how this relates to nature and I guess ideas that sort of go against what the state narratives are, because when we talk about indigenous communities and nation states and the idea of governments and governing millions of people in one space, to me that automatically arises conflicts of interest. I want to kind of get Jacob's idea as far as like what he's seen in the communities he's worked with, specifically in Oklahoma. You were telling me about before the interview.
Yeah, well, in explaining Marxism, you could see it in the indigenous communities. That's what introduced me to Marxism, was how I saw the vast popular demand for the revival of indigenous languages in East Oklahoma. Across the whole community, everybody was very much about the revival of their language, because there was a time period in the late end of the 20th century where Cherokee kids weren't allowed, like, that schools to speak Cherokee. They were put in residential schools. A lot of older people out there will have memories where an elder Cherokee person who was a preacher told me that every time he spoke Cherokee, he'd get hit 5 times a day in the residential school, or if not a day, but every time he did it, he got hit 5 times. He said he would get hit 200, 300 times a day because he didn't speak English when he began residential school. But so it's for this reason, after these residential schools, there's a kind of a gap in knowing the language because it was so pushed out by really the U.S. government. And but there's this big revival for the language, and you would see elders also, young people and elders, everybody want for people to speak their language again. And it became clear to me, I began learning about literacy programs and throughout history. And it became clear to me that these people who they work every day, right? They work for corporations that don't care if the language is revived or not. They inherited the conquest that removed this culture, that removed the original national sovereignty to begin with, and then the culture and the language. So they don't really have any inclination to actually make sure that these languages are revived with the amount of production value that they legally own because of the state, because of the U.S. government. And it was, but this is one example of what this is what we, I like what we call alienation. It's called alienation in class. Well, it's a class alienation, but it occurs alongside national alienation as well. And it's kind of the whole premise of what, of what Marxism is as a correction to capitalism. What socialism is as a correction to capitalism. This isn't the only example where this happens. For example, 50% of our farm workers in this country are undocumented, according to the Department of Labor, which means that as of now, because of this, because of the state policy, that they could be put in an ICE camp, in a concentration camp. Them and their family could be put in a concentration camp and removed. But who wants to keep building these concentration camps when 50% of our farm workers that feed everybody in this country, that feed everybody's kids in their most developmental years? I mean, even to the most selfish reasons, who would want this to continue? Why is that necessary? Mm-hmm. Well, it's because it gives a certain political leverage over our farm workers in this country. It gives a political leverage over them to say, oh, you want to ask for a raise, you want to collectively demand things, you want to, okay, well, we'll just call ICE and we'll put you in a concentration camp. That makes, you can have the employers, the corporate agriculture in our country has that leverage against those farm workers. And so it's, how they keep doing this, how they keep building these ICE camps is so many corporations who use that as leverage over their workforce will say, we'll lobby out the Republicans or lobby out the Democrats to build ICE camps, and by more and more. What we haven't heard spoken about yet since the election of Biden is that in 2021, 2.4 or 2.3 million people were placed in concentration or ICE concentration camps by the time of March 2022. And we haven't heard a word about that. And that's according to United We Dream, who got it from the Department of Homeland Security. But according to Washington Post, who got it from the Department of Homeland Security, that the Trump administration didn't even deport 1 million people. That's still way too much. It's nearly 1 million, but everybody went silent in 2021. And the reason why is, and it goes back to how, without this agricultural production, we don't have food. Nobody's eating food. If there's nobody actually doing the work, it's a political ownership that lobbies out our political parties. So in a sense, but who's giving them the monetary value to lobby out the political parties is the people actually picking the food. Our agricultural workers are in this way, they're forced due to this policy that we live under, where there's this extra ownership over production that doesn't contribute to the production process itself, but it's just there because of the state, because of a state policy. Because that policy is still there, our agricultural proletariat are literally building their own ICE camps to be put into against their will, obviously.
Wow.
That's what class alienation is. That's one of many examples of it. So
that's profound.
And that's the I found this in by the language struggle in Oklahoma really put me, I began seeing this more and more by also studying Marx and but reading it, and nobody understands that part of society, that when you look around, whether you're in your room or in your city, everything there took a process of production that made that thing be there, that made it possible to be there, whether they made the machines that made it, or whether they made it with machines, or they made the machines that made it, or they made the machines that made the machines that made it, or they drove the truck, or they made the machines that drove the truck. It took a finite productive process, but in that process, it wasn't necessary to have any extra ownership over that, just because it was just because they had a monetary value. The monetary value only measured the amount of value that came out of the productive process itself. So that's what ultimately a lot of misconception, and when you hear the words communism, you hear Marxism, you hear these words, and it's been pounded in our heads through the past 20th century. It's just bad. No, those words are bad. But this isn't, you don't even have to call it these words. It's just common sense. It's common sense that, that our government's not what continues our society, our productive processes. We don't have anything without that. And so that's because of that fact, we know that the government can only answer to the productive process, or at least who it gets ownership over the production process too. But even that case, they still have to answer to who actually does the work themselves. And if they don't, there's going to be problems. There's going to be political problems, because there won't be work done if somebody is because that weapon is always there. I like to say it's an inalienable dictatorship that all workers have. That this extra ownership only has a policy, and that can be countered with the policy. But the productive process itself, throughout history, since earliest as humanity has ever been, and as far as humanity goes, will always be here. It is the one power over any, no matter what policy it is. It has full power over culture. It has power over policy, but it has to be realized. That's the in order for it to I guess adjust the policy, this extra ownership is only political. So, but it in the end will ultimately fail to who actually carries the production process out themselves. That's kind of that's ultimately what we never get to hear about Marxism. We never get to understand that, but it's really just common sense. We don't even have to call it Marxism, so we can call it whatever.
Jay, I want to get your response to what Jake was talking about, but I've heard you, Jay. I listened to our interview like 3 times last week. I just had it playing, projecting throughout the house while I was cleaning up and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I can't believe that this is like stuff coming from my forum, like all these informative individuals, like enlightening the world. And I was listening. You kept saying how we need to maybe change. We were talking about perceptions of words and terminologies like Marxism and communism and socialism and anarchism. Do we necessarily need to change the term itself, and tell people to use something different than Marxism, or do people just need to realize that that's what Marxism is? Like, what's your response to that as far as this? You've referred to it as Pavlovian, the way we sort of approach these terminologies. We automatically get offended by them, but it's like we don't delve into the actual meanings and the different contexts of the words themselves.
I think it's going to be contextual, depending on what you're dealing with in the situation, right? And depends on your strategy for your local, depending on what you're organizing for, in certain situations, yeah, there's no reason not to talk about Marxism, because I feel like it's economically scientific, just like Newtonian physics, it's or what have you. That there's just there's so much you can gain from it, something else you can glean from it, that to cut people off from it, just because it may be not unpopular in certain circles, is really doing them a disservice. However, if you're just going up to somebody randomly and you have a sorry, my dog's being vocal.
No, you.
And if you're going up to just somebody who's just a random person that you might meet at a bar or something like that, it may not be a starter. It may be a non-starter. You know what I'm saying? So getting people where they're at materially, as Jacob has said, multiple times, ideology has to be sharpened down to the individual, right? It has to be based on their material circumstances. Anything else is kind of mystic, right?
Okay. And I tell you something, Jay. Just going to your book a little bit, because that's been a point of reference, like establishing an introduction. one common theme that I saw in these interviews is that there seems to be a reality that Jacob talked about, that the state presence is horrifying and is everywhere. Like we cannot escape the state for whatever reason. It's in every aspect of our life, whether we want it to be or not. Technology, the way we communicate with people is just always influenced by these people who are they're moving the goalposts constantly, because they control all the means, the distribution, everything. And Jacob, I love the way he introduced that into the conversation about this multi-tiered system of the people doing the work, and then you have people exploiting that work that are basically, I don't know what they're doing. It's almost arbitrary at that point, the math and the production value. Like, what is the actual production? Who's producing the stuff? Is it the companies aren't doing anything really? I mean, all the work is happening below them. They're just collecting from that work. And so we see a lot of the issues at hand. I guess the average person can see it as exploitation, but I don't understand why it's such a problem when you start going into like naming the ideologies themselves. Is that just intimidating to people? To you? And this is a question for both of y'all. Do you think the terminologies are just too broad for people to fathom, and they just have to stick it within their context of everyday life? Or is it, because I do have to admit, when I was reading some of these interviews, that I could see where the terminologies will almost lose a lot of people just like trying to read the book, because you would almost have to be within those communities to kind of get it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's very apt. That yeah, there's a lot of insular language that seems to be very, that you almost have to be privy to inside of an echo chamber to engage with in any sort of meaningful way. And I don't think that's necessary. I think that is a good critique of the work I was doing back then. It was for a left wing. Our audience was a left wing audience, so anti-authoritarian sort of audience, to be honest, at the time. And so I think that I think it was definitely positioned that way and posited that way, but I think that's a super just critique of leftist activists in general, is that we do oftentimes talk on a level that's a little bit above the head of people who haven't been initiated into the culture of the left. And the left, it shouldn't be a culture, really. It shouldn't be that we should be following the people. You know what I mean? We shouldn't be dictating what the organizers should be following, listening to what the people want, and then developing from there. Now, that being said, people want to hear interviews from people who might be talking that language, at the same time. So I think there is an audience for it, but it's it's maybe not useful in a lot of circumstances to be but at that same time, there's so much rich historical knowledge, and I think that propaganda has been used so heavily against this that that there's nobody who's going to speak up for it that most people know, right? Most people aren't going to engage with somebody who speaks up for it. So they're going to hear politics and they're going to think of Democrat and socialism. And I mean Democrat and Republican. And they're not going to think about socialism really much, because they're going to think that as something that happens somewhere else. You know what I mean? Something that is a dead form of government that doesn't work anymore, that's authoritarian, that's tyrannical. That's the thoughts that go through their head, I believe. But when you look at the actual conditional material like situation in these places, and you look at the facts of the situations, that our country is far more authoritarian, does far more damage than any of these, and spends way more money on anti-communism than they do on social programs, probably. And so, like, if the issue is that, like, that we've been propagandized continuously against these types of languages, against these types of states. And that, like, and so there needs to be somebody somewhere to, say, hey, no, these things actually worked very well, and to counter that propaganda,
I like that. Jacob?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, if going to why these words scare people, why they just go, oh, there's it comes back to people's consciousness, and it's and this is something that that what people understand, that whatever somebody's ideology is, it's entirely dependent on what they understand, and what they understand is entirely dependent on what they've been exposed to, like what they've seen, what they've been talked to about, what they've been explained. And so in the same way that when somebody, you know, is this is another form of alienation, is that, say, like lobbyism, you sit, you know, you sit there and you work at a corporation, they take your surplus value, they give you a wage that you were like lucky to get because you couldn't have any other way to live under, you know, under capitalism. And so they give you a you know, they take your surplus value, and what they do from there is, even if they're taking, say you have however many people will work at a corporation, 200,000, a large corporation, all of them, all that surplus value from their production is going to the private owners. That's only there because of the, you know, that's only there because of the state. So in the same way that they take, say, that surplus value to lobby a law, that those people who actually carried out the value of what the monetary fund that's going to pay the lobby, say a representative out, the same way they have no say in what they're being and what's lobbied for them, like what's lobbied over their government. But in that exact same way, it works the same way with the news sponsors, with the media sponsors,
Yeah.
in culture and education and all these things. Also, they're the people are the ones making the value, making the monetary value. But simply because of the state's policy, somebody owned all of the surplus of that production value. They got to sponsor something that could easily, that, you know, will eventually go against the interests of the people who work at that place. Eventually they want certain things, you know, and there's an interest against each other. As a matter of fact, the employer is inclined to pass laws that are against the interest of, you know, even the self-realized interest of all of the workers where they work at, you know, even if they all collectively agreed, wait, we don't, you know, why would we sponsor this? Why we don't want to spend our money sponsoring that? You know, we wouldn't want to do that. They don't get a say simply because the policy is that one person who owned it already, like, you know, who owned it, who inherited the value of a state's conquest, you know, from the past 250 years of the United States, where we started out as 13 colonies, you know, and expanded more and more and got more value until there's, you know, that all went somewhere who was somebody was basically received the value of that production, you know, or that the value of that material, and then production began. You know, it was because they didn't have that, they don't have a say in what is actually being said. And so, you know, you could, this is why that, you know, the people, when you study Marxism, it explains how this extra ownership is a dead weight on our society. We don't actually need it, but it's also going to be inherently despotic because its only ownership is through the state. So it's going to keep expanding the state as if it's its own business. You know, it's not its own production. So it needs the state because that's the only thing that carries out its policy. That's the only thing that physically enforces its policy. So it's, you know, and so, but doing that, knowing that, well, if we don't actually, you know, camouflage what we're doing by saying that, like, oh, Marxism is where the government comes and there's this government, we, you know, somehow getting the power to get all these people to do something they don't want to do, and it just owns it. These mean government people own everything. And later I'd like to explain the democratic process of central democracy as an alternative to corporate democracy. You know, now it's a more democratic system, because that's something that never gets explained either. But you know, that's the that, you know, they're going to obviously sponsor things that have people going around saying, oh, they want to come take your property, worker, they want to come take your house. They don't want to, you know, they don't want to make it to where we can't lobby the government out anymore. They don't want to make it to where you have a say over what your production is sponsoring into the culture, what your production is, and what's being alienated out. You know, the people who already own everybody's production, they have no reason to sit there and explain what Marxism is in its full.
Yeah.
They can only run for their existence as a class. You know, they could only say, oh, well, so if people don't oppose us, you know, and it wears down our state's physical coercion, we have to camouflage ourselves so they don't see it, so they don't see what we're doing. Like, you know, because Marx will explain to these people what we are doing in a way that they understand, you know. And so that's why you just hear, yo, evil and stuff that doesn't make sense. The idea of there's like a one person dictator,
Exactly.
not that it's just a defense minister, you know, protecting their country from imperialism, you know, like that's why that, you know, it's the, They control, whoever owns production is given overall dictatorship over cultural knowing because of this, like overall cultural knowing. Because everybody has to answer to capital the same way that our elected representatives still have to answer to capital, to stay in their political parties. I like to say like this: if you're at your job and the person who pays you tells you to do something, you go, no, I don't believe in that. I don't think. What does the person do? They replace you. They kick you out and replace you. Our government is the same way. Because we do live in a dictatorship of capital. Everybody's having to answer to where money is coming from in order to survive. The media works that way, the state, and then so the only solution to it is that there is no capital without production. The capital is worthless. So there is a new ruler. There is a new dictatorship that's coming in, and it's the dictatorship of all the people who work. Not just the people that own.
Oh yes. There's so much, so many thoughts are going in my head just hearing these ideas. I tell you, Jay, I have a question, and then if you want to comment to Jacob or respond to anything, you're more than welcome to do that as well. I want to know what would be an immediate step for you in transitioning into socialism and ultimately into Marxism. What would be the quickest way to that in your perspective? And would that even be possible given the infrastructure that we're currently dealing with right now?
So I think we're seeing it in 2020. We were having the largest protests in our nation's history. In 2021 and 2022, we had largest union membership rises in decades and decades. And in 2022, we had the highest strikes in long time. Striking has gone up and up, and we're seeing it right now. Nurses and teachers are striking at the beginning of this year. So I think that getting involved in unions is going to be where a lot of this is at. Getting contact with your local community, developing networks. I think it's going to start with, and I think Jacob's going to talk about a little bit later, the Soviet democratic style of engagement. That starts with the cadre and the local workplace and the local neighborhood, the community. Developing programs inside your local community that meet your material needs of your community in ways that the system won't. That shows that that the system is either incapable or refuses to do certain things, to show its weaknesses, to show how much we can do together, to show that power, to get morale boosted, to have small victories over things that are capable of being done with a few. Developing that into practicing that dictatorship of the proletariat over capital. Showing how people and our work and our labor and our voices can be a powerful tool against the machine itself, and then practicing that and getting better and better at it. I don't know if it's a quick process. I think that the process has been going on for a long time. So that's the positive thing, is that it's not like we're starting from zero. That we're following a long lineage of people since the 1800s who have been and before, who have been fighting this struggle. I don't think we're starting at ground zero. I think we have a lot. We've got to work with what we have. We need to have a organized party, that's capable of developing programs that can meet people's needs in their local area, that can then speak for them on a national level, that can eventually seize power. That's the eventuality. To get there from here to there, there's a million different roads, and we have to take all of them. Like it's
I do have a response to something you just said. You mentioned, and you are right about the attitudes within labor movements and stuff now. There has been such an increase in union membership. There has been. I'm concerned though that to me, I was on the Tyler King, not his pod, but Tyler King did an episode with me, and he's a personal friend of mine that lives in the same city he's a personal friend of the family, and he was asking about all these different political angles, and he told me, Kiko, what is it going to take? What would it take for there to be some kind of a revolution? And I told him it would have to start from the workers, um, which is a lot more of us. I mean, there's more people producing the work than anything. I mean, there are way more workers than there are owners. And if you, I mean, ideally we own the work. I mean, we should. I mean, if we're the ones that are producing, we should own it too. But I was telling him that it would take a mass scale strikes, like major companies. But I've seen some problematic issues even within union activity. It seems like when the unions get so big, they become attached to these statist parties and statist agendas and corporations. And it's like, would that just kill the other unions because a few unions get bigger than the other ones? And it's almost like a situation where the banking, bubble happened. And I'm thinking like a general strike, wouldn't there need to be some sort of a general strike? And why hasn't that happened yet? You would think with so much union activity that there would be some sort of an organized union strike that would actually last for a while.
I think big box unions. That's the and you have and a lot of times in those situations, especially since the Wagner Act in 1934, you have a situation where there is a consolidation of power and a certain amount of negotiation, as opposed to they're not trying to be Marxist, since they're not trying to overthrow, they're trying to negotiate. They're trying to say we are part of the economy and we want to negotiate at this particular workplace. We're not necessarily trying to have some sort of social upheaval. And that's just a lot of the people in the higher ups are of that mindset. They're not really they're not of a revolutionary mindset. They're not trying to be. That's just not. That's and that doesn't mean that it's not better for the worker to have a union than not to. You know what I mean? It's just that that means that we're going to have people that for that to happen. I mean, the capitalists have always pitted different unions against each other: the railway workers versus the railroad worker. The track layer versus the people who were doing the conducting and stuff. And so and we kind of live in the exceptions, like this kind of talk about earlier. And I don't mean we as in like people who are thinking about these kind of things, but just in general, it's the exception of the good cop, the exception of the good landlord, the exception of the good boss that you've seen. And capitalism does this because it puts it creates so many layers between the capitalist that like runs industry and the CEO even that runs your company, and like so many different people in between that you can almost empathize with. And we want to empathize, with people and stuff like that, and think, oh, if we were given that kind of responsibility, we might have to make tough decisions too. And so instead of thinking, okay, what could be better than this, which is like almost like which is infinite possibilities of what could be better, then we think it's like we just want to like, it seems so much hard. I think that in the mind, it seems so much harder to do the things it would take to change the thing than it is to just deal with it, right? And so the mind creates this like ability to just deal with it, and that'll happen. Humans are capable of anything, you know what I mean? Like capable of living through the worst of situations and the most horrible of circumstances, and the mind plays a big part in that, for better and worse, right?
Well, when you see leadership of I guess you see bureaucracy among a labor movement. It's the same thing as when you hear the U.S. government, when you hear say that they're going to a different country for democracy, that because we have democracy here, and they're going to go they're going to go suppress the uprising in Haiti against the U.S. client state there, as just for democracy, because they're gangs and they're terrorists. These other states that are against that the U.S. government is against, their brutal dictatorships. So it's interesting because within the labor movement, usually if there's a bureaucracy that overtakes the like that basically gaslights the workers when they're frustrated. And we see this a lot where people are getting more like union members are getting angry at their union leaders who are just kind of placed in front of them. When there's a bureaucracy there, when there's opportunism, and they're not listening to what the demands of the workers are. At this point, I mean, it's the same. It's almost in the same sense. But oftentimes, not knowing what to do about it comes from a lack of class consciousness, not just among union members, but among the entire people. Among the entire people, to where everybody's on the same page about how much power working people actually have in real life. The true freedom of their labor. If you don't have that, then it's easy for the leadership to say, no, we're just going to do this. Okay, there's the same way you'll see the Democrat during 2020, the corporate Democrats sent people out in the communities to say, stop saying defund the police, that loses people. Who loses who? Their donors, but they're going to go around. When it's just top down, it's like, okay, everyone, that's what they said. We got to, they tried to make it about, it was just about Trump and not about the clear problem we're having with how our police are, with how ridiculously massive our prison state is. But but it's the same thing though. Like in an example of this is, I don't know if you know about this it's basically a regime change operation that Ronald Reagan started called the National Endowment of Democracy. And what this does is it funds, protests and uprising in different countries where the policies aren't like basically completely submissive to the corporations in the United States, where they don't allow the corporations to lobby their laws out here and basically own everything in their country. Like they end up funding these unrest and act like they're doing a good thing by trying to bring corporations in their country. It's interesting though, because on that board you have people like Elliot Abrams, who's a convicted war criminal from Iraq. He's sitting on that board from the Iraq War, convicted war criminal across, and also stuff in South America, I believe too. But on there, you also have the vice president of the USW, a very important union. It's Roxanne Brown. She's also on the, and so it's just interesting. It's just interesting to see, why is that? Why do they need to have a leader there on board with this foreign, this stuff that's supposed to spread democracy to other countries, which is a complete contradiction. Because a part of democracy is self-determination. So for the U.S. to be saying, "Oh no, this is democracy," do what we say, so it's democracy. That's obviously not democracy. But she's there too, and she's the vice president of the largest steel union in the country. And why is that? Well, I think there has something to do, going back into history. During 1919, when after World War I, workers across the whole world were angry about how much violence went on, how much fighting there was across the whole world between these imperialist powers. But also something happened where there's an uprising in October in Petrograd in Russia, in what now St. Petersburg. And then the Soviet Union began. The Civil War had begun because there was an organized structure behind it, that eventually brought, that constitutionally made it to where in their constitution that people would own their own production, and they formed their own democratic system that basically eliminated lobbyism. It's an entirely reorganization of democracy that's truly more democratic. But in the United States, unsuspectedly, a lot of people don't know that at that time, 12 different nations invaded Russia after that. 12 different governments had invaded Russia to try to suppress their civil war, just to fight this uprising among the working class there. The U.S. was one of them. People don't know that. The U.S. invaded Russia during that time. And even though they were allies with the Tsar fell, and then they invaded Russia. But right when, in 1919, right in the smack dab in the middle of the Russian Civil War, something happened in the United States. 350,000 steelworkers across the entire country all walked out of their factories. It was a huge strike, steelworkers, and it pillaged, it maimed the steel supply that the U.S. was going to use to, suppress the Bolshevik Revolution. It killed it because so many people said, no, we don't want that. And when the police would try to, they called out the National Guard and they'd come up and shoot them and hit them. It was a fight, it was a class war. It was a fight. And they would call them Cossacks, they'd say there was Arists and call them Cossack, the police on the horses, but it was during that time, it was across Akron and San Francisco and Seattle and Minneapolis and New York and all these different places. They completely destroyed their steel supply. And so I think it's for that reason they realized, well, wait, that's how this whole global proletariat revolution began in the first place is that we weren't able to get steel there to stop it from happening. We weren't able to keep the steel supply there to keep it going. And so it makes sense why the leader of the USW would be on this imperialist think tank that Ronald Reagan started. That's actually just a part of the US government called the National Endowment of Democracy. She has to be coordinated with it, because they kind of learned their lesson from that no, there is a dictatorship of the proletariat. There is that. It's inalienable. It's just there whether they like it or not.
Yeah, they have. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna go to you, Jay. Before you respond to Jacob, I was gonna say something that Jay referred to earlier. Jay mentioned the protest, just this incredible number of them. How effective have those protests been, considering it seemed like the circumstance with the steel workers, obviously we're talking about historically a different circumstance, but what made that so much more effective then versus some of the protesting that Jay referred to, that in my estimation really is almost a protest within neoliberalism circles? It's almost not even, you don't see the tangibility of it the same way, which kind of makes me question the effectiveness of it, just like the Julian Assange situation with the political prisoners. It's like I see pockets of it, but I don't see a mass movement of people in unison attacking these issues like that at once. It seems like there's some sort of there's something to lose if certain sects, you refer to sectarianism a lot in the book. It seems like there's a lot of people that are willing to almost, commit to a cause, but they don't want to be too committed to it if certain elements of it aren't in accordance with it, because then maybe I don't want to be viewed differently, and maybe I don't want to ostracize some people down the road. It seems like there's a lot of that self-preservationist attitude in the protesting going on now, and not like something that's just almost a spiritual sort of a kinetic feeling that's like, no, we're not doing anything at all. Like, we're fucking sitting out this thing and nobody can compromise it.
Yeah, I think that's a really astute observation. I think that the circumstances by which the events, I mean, there's so many things going on at that time. I mean, you talked earlier, why hasn't there been a general strike? You know what I mean? And maybe there was. Maybe that during the pandemic there was a general strike and they just didn't call it that. You know what I mean? Maybe it was so hard to tell. You know what I mean? And there was no way to tell if people were doing that out of political reason, out of just fuck it, or if they were doing it because it was an unsafe situation to work. You know what I mean? Like a mixture of both. You know what I mean? Maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe people were like, well, this is not a situation to work. I'm going to finally exercise that thing I would have done now that I have the material capacity to do so. You know what I mean? So I would say that too. And then you saw these big numbers because of that situation. In a certain extent, people had the capacity to go out. Now, in that capacity, there's just more people who are vaguely aware of a situation, and it's coming from the fact that Mr. Floyd had a successful career in the music industry beforehand with a group of people who were able to already outreach a whole lot of people. You know what I mean? So when this incident happened, he already had street teams of people already ready to like put this out. You're not saying like this particular thing, but anything that would have happened to him. You know what I'm saying? Because he was a beloved member of the community, right? Who had some level of publicity through the music industry, right? And so he already had promotional capability. You know what I mean? So that happened, and so that isn't the exact same as, let's say, a group of people who were like. Now you had that coalesce with the Black Lives Matter movement, which was already happening. You know what I mean? And so you had these different groups coalescing, but the Black Lives Matter movement isn't a monolith in and of itself. Every chapter has autonomous beliefs. Some of them are super Marxist, some of them are super liberal, and a few of them are even conservative-ish. You know what I mean? Or Hotep.
Yeah.
So I think that so that you have a variety of different different beliefs within that situation. Now I don't think that we are going to or have to be exactly on the same line on everything. I don't think that, I think that was, back in the day, I think that I had this belief that we all had to have this same ideology. This would be a self-crit of mine. If we all just got it, that we would just move on. Like enough information alone would change the material reality. And I don't think that, I don't believe that anymore. And I think that there's like real material conditions that can be achieved that will change the materiality, and that those material conditions have been achieved in other places, and that's why the materiality changed. Now, to go to your point about the steel worker and the tangible results of the 2020 things, police are having a hard time finding people. You know what I mean? So that's a tangible
that's
reality.
True. That's very true.
But
is that being linked to like the underbelly of the frustration of the populace, of the people? Like, is that being linked, or are people thinking this for other reasons? Or they think it's because the streets aren't safe anymore, because the status narrative is that all the cops are just too scared of their lives, so they're not wanting to be cops anymore, which is some bullshit.
So they're certainly going to spin any of these things in the direction of wherever they're going to, do it. I believe this because people are, don't want to be, doing something that is relatively dangerous compared to some other jobs, and feel like people hate them. Like that's just on a non-political level. That I wouldn't want to, you know what I mean? Like at this point in time, you wouldn't want to work that job, even if you were like, oh, police are necessary, right? Like, or even if you were like, it's just not a. It's just like bad, like, you know what I mean? Everybody's getting, like, people are, you know what I mean? It's just, we've made it unfashionable, and that's powerful in and of itself. Now, one more thing that you had said that I think is important, that like that I wanted to touch on real quick, was that that Jacob had said also, was that, this person's working with the NED that's at the head, of course, of the unions, and of course they're going to put people in various situations. This is capitulation, right? Capitulation of certain movements, certain mechanisms, certain whatever. If that is the issue, I believe, of a lot of this Occupy Wall Street. They didn't have clear demands. A lot of people said that you have to make demands that the system itself can't capitulate to. You know what I mean? So if you make a demand, and then the Democrats say, okay, we're down with all of this, but don't say defund the police or whatever, or whatever it might be. Then you've kind of taken all that momentum and agitation, and it just goes nowhere. So that's why spontaneous action isn't. It's going to happen, and it's a good thing, because it shows the power of the people. But if it doesn't lead to something, if it doesn't have some sort of guiding, mechanism behind it, it won't lead to the kind of tangible results that we saw in 1919.
Okay.
And I also wanted to add in that, I believe the police recruiting is low, but so is the military recruiting. It's also low.
Good.
These are both things that make the state what it is, where it carries out the state's policy. The state is just an organized coercion point that carries out policy, but it's also they've had a record low of recruits. They're down like by 25% in their recruiting part. And then, so you see Fox News get up here and say, it's woke. That's why, because everybody's woke now, and the kids are woke, and they use that word. And that used to be what the Democrats called like the defund the police movement. They'd say that was woke, when Trump was president. Now it got handed off to the Republicans, and they use it to say things that they know will make more people mad, and like it's but you see the and it's the same people sponsoring them. So that, I say the corporate state's using that word against the people, because they don't want people to realize things. They don't want people to wake up and see how exactly our society is around us, and the difference between our culture that we keep getting put in our face by these corporations, or this corporate culture, and what reality is, and who we actually are. That's but they'll say that, but like as if we don't have internet now, and as if we don't see what the U.S. military has been used for its entire existence, that it's obviously not worth joining the military. That like you could look at the Iraq War and see everything that happened in the Iraq War. There's nothing redeemable. There's no reason for us. The military at this point, they see there's no reason for us to keep going to other countries and trying to be the adults in those countries, as if no matter what, if they want to sit there and go, oh, but they did this and that, and they don't, even though they don't speak a language we understand, like there's no way that people here could possibly know what is actually going on there. They want to say, no, we're the adults in their country. We know better. Those adults can't handle it. They're basically all like children. We have to go be the adults, and that's not working anymore. And a lot of young people see that. A lot of people know that that's not how, that we don't need to be the adults in their country, that we need to be the adults here, that they could be the adults in their country, you know. And that's why we're on a, but because our whole economical system in the United States has been, you know, if you start out as 13 colonies and go to 50 states, you're going to be built around war. You're going to be built around nonstop military production and not like centered around the military. If anybody wants to, whether it be Elon Musk and eating lithium, so you know he's tweets out, you know, he helps coups Bolivia, he funds the coup in Bolivia, you know, because that's their number one export. They're going to center around this imperialism, that the military U.S. state provides for them, the military itself, you know, because that's what this whole economical system has been thus far, you know. It's they have nothing else but to expand and take stuff for cheap, you know. That's all they can do at this point because they're out of room here. That, or they have to, you know, try to, they're going to, you know, they increase their despotism here as more and more of the rest of the world says, no, be gone with you. We're tired of you coming in and doing this to everybody and doing this to our neighboring countries. And, you know, it's that's kind of where their downfall is. This, and along with the police, it doesn't make sense for us to continue to be the most incarcerated country in human history. It doesn't make sense for our prison, you know, which is really the coercive part of society, you know, if somebody breaks a policy and if it's, you know, they can get put in prison for it, it doesn't make sense for that to be for profit, for there to be quota and it not be, well, you know, the justice system is erroneous. There's seldom justice for a lot of people, you know, in our society. It doesn't make sense for us to keep being that, and everybody's just using common sense now, and this class that has only used that has only, you know, used us as, or our prison population, that for its profitability, you know, wars and our military for its profitability. They're like, why don't you guys want to do this with us anymore? And they don't get it. They don't understand, you know.
I had a comment about that sort of relates to Jay's book. There were two people that stood out in those interviews. There were lots of different interviews that were conducted. Lauren McKendry, and who was the other person? Brenton Lingle. Those two people in particular mentioned they seem to be, their particular energy in the interviews seem to be more geared towards, let's stop worrying so much about sectarianism and these different sects of leftism, and let's focus on who the hell can we get the message through to. And that's kind of where I'm at this point. Like, I identify as a left libertarian, but I'm at a point where it's like, we really have to connect with all types of people at this point and not kind of box it in. And I think Jay, and I'm glad that Jay, and I do understand that that's not really a critique because that was written. Those interviews were done in 2015 and 2016. A lot of them were. And so that's not a critique of you. It's just more so the sentiment of the people and the political landscape. It changed a lot, you know, especially with the Bernie situation. At least immediately on the electoral politics level, the political atmosphere changed a little bit as far as people thinking about these ideas, maybe in ways they hadn't thought about them before. And they kind of were reacting within the moment that, you know, we got to kind of keep it within the left and build this movement. But I'm saying, why don't we build something that's a lot broader and see who's willing to listen to us? Because I hear people that it's absolutely crazy. I talked to someone, I'm not going to mention their name on here, but a few hours ago, I was with a gentleman and he gets it about the militarism aspect of it. A person that's a conservative, like, he was taking in what I was saying just with open arms, like genuinely trying to get where I was coming from. And he was agreeing with a lot of what I was saying. And then it's like I listen to like a lot of my friends still now, just like very liberal people, and they just keep going on and on and on, and they don't see the connection between the pullout of Afghanistan and how we had to find some kind of a way to keep this military bullshit war machine going on with the Ukraine diversion. So we pull out of one country and then it's like, okay, let's start some shit over with Ukraine with the NATO alliance. And it's just like, do they not see that that's still war? Like the sanctions against all these countries, against Iran, against Cuba, do you not see that that's still a part of the war machine? And it's like they don't even acknowledge you that you relate the two together. They're like, well, it's not quite the same. And I'm like, how's that not the same?
Yeah,
It's so much.
they don't see that. They don't see that. These corporations are like these are private corporations that need war to keep going. You know, even though our military is like the our state itself. It's what the state is. You know, so that state is for profit. That is no longer a separation between the market and the state. The state is a market at that point. Like, you know, it's you know, that's the defense has to be nationalized because that's what's being done in everyone's name. If it's just a matter of who lobbies, then what's supposed to be our democracy is really just getting decided in a private board somewhere. You know, between like, yeah, let's see if we need to go to Ukraine. Let's see if we and you the whole time they do have to think, well, what if the people here overthrow us? What if they decide that they're just going to nationalize our military, at least nationalize our prison system, and it no longer be a private corporation anymore. You know, what if they decided to do that? They have to consider that as well. And it's their that's why they sit there and just say, oh, this is bad and that's bad. They sponsor that because that's their business, you know.
Yeah.
Constantly go out and do it. It puts everybody here in the line of fire for a profitable defense instead of a practical defense, you know. It puts us all here in the line of fire for what just makes them money during their time here on earth, you know. And
Yeah.
it needs to be seen as that. It needs to be seen as that's what they are doing when they continue to lobby our state out, you know, and they continue to touch our state and tell our state what to do. And you know, they are putting us all at risk like that. And yeah, it's almost in a weird way like a cult. You know, you've heard that people say that that's Russian propaganda. Well, you're supposed to, you know, you're supposed to be able to hear the other propaganda. You know, are you saying this isn't propaganda? You know, our side isn't. You're supposed to be able to hear both sides. And if you can't hear both sides, you're in a cult. You know, that's how, you know, the other side's so evil and so, you know, it's so evil and bad that it will manipulate your small human brain, and you have to just leave it up to the whoever's sponsoring our media. You know, that's that's a cult mentality. It's a very that operates like that's how cults do. Like, no, don't listen to those outside people. We do have magical powers in here. Like, you know, you just have to have faith. Do you not have faith? Are you with the evil people? Are you with Satan? You know, like, you know, you're supposed to be able to hear both sides, and that's being diplomatic. That's how you reach a conclusion. But then we may not go to war, and we may not, you know, we may decide we don't want to do that. That loses money for certain very few people in this country. But,
Well, this stuff seems so. I hate to use this word, but a lot of stuff we're saying seems like it's so common sense. Like if people really just almost reset themselves and just say, okay, what has been my trajectory, point A to point B? What is Jacob saying? What is Jay saying is not making sense? Like I just don't know what doesn't make sense. Like we had the facts there, we're stating the information, and they still, it's like the same people will like nod their head, and then it's like they do some shit that's just like completely opposite. It just goes against everything we talked about. You know, they've done such a good job of branding everything. Everything is branded now. Um, and I think that's what's been so effective with these tools that they have is like you said, not only are they sponsored by the same people who are causing the wars, but they have this everyone has to be attached to this branding, and it's like this brand is the best brand, the New York Times is the best brand, the Washington Post is the best brand. Like people are still giving legitimacy to these sources, but when you read them, it's like it's an opinion piece. Like, how is that opinion any different than what we're doing now? Like, how does that measure against anything that we're giving to people right now? And I guess it's
Yeah,
just more of a general comment.
I mean, like, yeah, and a lot of these pieces, if you go back, you know, just if you go look at their sources and stuff like that, it's defense contractors that are like funding, like what they're saying and stuff, and like and positioning it as news, you know, and yeah, it's important for the shows like this and things to be able to you know, say what's actually happening, to be able to talk to people on the ground, and be able to, I would almost say for people not to pay attention to the news media, but at the same time, you want to pay attention to see how they're saying things, because they're saying what they're going to do next in a lot of ways. They're positioning you, or they're grooming you to accept the eventuality that they're trying to pass on. You know what I mean? And they frame it as a conversation or a debate or whatever between two sides, two opposing sides. When in
Mhm.
reality, we know that that is pro wrestling. It's verbal pro wrestling, and that's all it is. That's why you never see in the course of a debate, oh, that was a good idea. Like, because that would be, I mean, not in pro wrestling. Sometimes you'll see somebody be like, "Oh, wow, good move. I'm impressed that you were able to pull that off." You know what I mean? In the course of their, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't even see that. It's faker than pro wrestling, and so like it's less realistic, you know. And so I think that the media in general is it teaches people also how to respond to each other in a way that's not cool. Like, it's so interesting. You bring out Burt Lingle, right? And I'll try to hook you all up, and because he's a good person to interview. He does debates a lot. But he has a friend network that's so vast, right? Like, he'll let anybody on his wall. He doesn't block people, basically, right? And he's a Zen Buddhist, and so he has a very specific way of engaging with things, right? We've known each other since Occupy, and so he was friends with he's friends with people who are Marxists. He's friends with people who are like liberal, but like liberal in like a very right, far right-ish way, like Tim Pool, for instance. you know like, like he's he puts it, he tries to influence in various different circles. He realizes the power of influence. I think he's an intelligent individual for sure.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go into an arena that I'm not as familiar with, and that's the environment. That's an area that admittedly I need to do a better job of. I've started to develop more of an appreciation to the environment, um, and that's been relatively recent. And I'll tell you why, and I'll give you guys kind of the mic as far as like going forward and sort of examining those reasonings. A lot of this goes back to positionality, and it also goes into one of the things I noticed too, just like with the interviews in the book, and also um, my perceptions too, like as not necessarily being a part of these anarchist communities or being in some of these groups, but I'm just a professor that was a student for a long time that's followed a lot of different movements over the years. And I'll talk to pretty much anybody, but I've never really committed to any particular group or groups. I've always been like that. I've always kind of kept that to myself, and just, I believe the information is really powerful, but I don't want to necessarily commit to groups and organizations. A lot of people in my position, I grew up in a two-parent household. I've had a great life. I've middle class now, but I've had a great life. But I also have that traumatic experience of being a Black person in the United States. And I think there's so much other stuff that goes on with like the average Black person. I don't want to speak for everybody. It's like we almost don't get to stuff like the environment, that it's like should be an immediate number one concern for anybody. But we almost have to get through like our own shit first before we can even get to these turn the pages. And I noticed that a lot too during the interviews, where people were pinpointing down deep ecology, and there were these terms I'd never heard of before. Like, I admit, like, I thought I knew a lot about stuff, and I'm like, I've never heard of that term ever in my life, and I'm 40 years old. And it's like, is that just a disconnect from my own just personal experiences with the world and just not connecting with nature the same way because of all this other stuff? I noticed that there seems to be a lot of disconnect with Black people, especially with their immediate concerns versus some of the other people and their immediate concerns.
I think with some of that stuff, it's very niche, and like Zerzan, and like deep ecology. And I was, just to be frank, I was going through my period of growth came, essentially environmentalism came before my real understanding of political stuff. I was still trying to wrap my mind around it in my early 20s and stuff like that. I was involved with DGR and some of those groups, and there's just I think, to be quite honest, a lot of that stuff comes from a very white privileged place. Just to be straight up, you see a lot of people, not to say it's always that, but it's like a certain kind of like, I don't know. It's there's a certain amount of almost like
It's
this.
just life experiences.
No,
Is
I
that
think
what it is?
I think that, I mean, I don't want to critique a whole group of people too much right now in terms of like the entire deep ecology environmentalist movement, but it is predominantly white, and I think there's a reason for that. And I think that I think that it is that it promotes a certain kind of adventurism, almost this kind of this thing that is about ideal versus material, that working class people in general and people who have like you said, I think you nailed it, they have like a lot of other issues that they're dealing with. This kind of stuff seems almost like like I felt like this, the eventuality that people see under the situations that they're calling for is that white supremacy would take over the power vacuum. And so they feel like that's not good. That hasn't been taken into account in a lot of these by a lot of these folks. I feel like it's a major criticism that could be put,
I got you. I see what you're saying. Jacob, I want to hear you too, Jacob, because you work with indigenous communities, and I'm wondering about your experiences too. Do you see a lot of this, these cultural disconnects, even if you do live in a community with people, you still have those perceptions, whether the way you grew up or just whatever it may be?
Well, yeah, the environmental question is kind of the there is this thing that's like that Marxism is against. You can read all the way to Marx himself. He's all the way, like, he's against it. Back then it was called Malthusianism, and it was a big propaganda that was used for the British Empire and their expansion. Was that there's too many people, there's a population surplus, and not that things are only getting made because it gives some few people more power, like rather than maintaining a community of people, like it's like production is supposed to be. It's that, there's too many people, and look, they're destroying the world, they're destroying this was going on in the 1800s all the way back then. And you see that oftentimes where they're just like, what do we do? And I was watching this video last night, actually. It was of Coco the gorilla, and they had Coco the gorilla sign language. I don't know if you've seen that.
No,
sign language songs, but I was listening to the song, and the song's called Man Stupid. Like it's about people being like humanity being stupid, and like it's because people. And so they keep showing like all this they keep showing all these like people drilling for oil in the ocean, and like trees getting cut down and all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, well, who's having people do that? Like who does that out of their like financial interests? Like who's having people do that? It's these are all corporations that are knocking all this stuff down here and destroying things. But it's all of us. It's all people. That's all that people are the problem. And yeah, if that continues under capitalism, the way we have it now, it's going to keep going the way capitalism has always been, which is to find the marginalized group or the marginalized cultures, marginalized group of people, and they're going to be the first to be cut out and say, oh, you got to have less people, less people. That could obviously only serve some very wealthy, rich-minded people who are actually the ones deciding what we're doing, at this stage. It's at this state, but it's and that's the big kind of the struggle with the environmental. Is like, no, we need to not have such irresponsible despotism over the way we do production, over the way we actually are. It's obvious the number one contributing entity to the ozone layer or to the removal is the U.S. bomb cycle itself.
Yep.
So for the bomb, but then you see people who own like all these bomb companies, all these bomb corporations, and military, corporations. They'll sit there and sponsor stuff, but we need to do this. Everyone needs, my thing's doing this thing right now.
Oh, it's all good. I see it.
It did that a couple of times earlier, so it's just my face there. But
your audio is going good.
Yeah. So but they're sponsoring, like, we all need to do our part, and it's like telling people to kind of make up for what they do, make up for their removal of the ozone. Within the US's water naval area, there's a big pile of trash that's like this, like apparently the size of Texas, and you can turn plastics into petroleum. That's what plastics are made of, is petroleum. I'm like, why won't the US, if they need oil, even if they're invading all these countries for oil, why don't they go there? Why don't they go there and get all that oil, and go grab all that? It's like, why do they? It's like, no, they're it's actually that they need combat because that's what's for profit, right? Like they could go get that, but yet they're sitting there telling us, like, no, don't have making us do all the extra stuff. You got to bicycle more. You got to do, and not that people shouldn't do that. I think that's great for people, and people who do that have a good heart. They actually are wanting to do things for everybody. So that's not the problem. It's the problem when you see corporations telling everybody that they're the problem. That's all the people themselves are the problem. And the amount of environmental damage, like we just now started hearing on the news about Jackson, Mississippi, for example. What was going on with Flint. In the Navajo reservation, there's like a third of people there have access to water, and it's like, there's all sorts of these situations across where things get polluted in a certain area and nobody hears about it. It's just kind of an abstract. We need to do better for the environment and da 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 da. They can't see where things are, like, where people's or whose environment is particularly being targeted. Whose environment is actually whose communities are being weakened because of this. How it's like it's a weapon.
I'm glad that you all are talking about this, and I'm getting more insight into it, because I didn't want it to be like one of those situations where I'm approaching, because I like to approach things and not judge them. But my gut inside was telling me that just seems to be some sort of just a cultural, like there's some almost an insensitivity in a way, with sad peoples that I was talking about before. Not one person in particular, but just these types of mindsets about the environment. I think about the Sunrise movement when it was at its peak. And I'm saying to myself, how does that make any sense? These same people are like, that are supposedly like for the environment, and it's like they tell me, like, let's support these people over here, and like the people who are like polluting the earth, you want me to support those people, and that's what your movement's about? Like, that's so weird to me, and that's when I started to take that stuff less seriously. But I know that there has to be some people who have their minds in the right direction. Like you said, the plastic to petroleum, you would think that would be a very scientific, smart thing to do. Is it that the petroleum in Saudi Arabia has a higher stock price to it or something, and so they don't want to compete with that, and they don't want to actually produce petroleum for themselves, and it's about money at the end of the day? It's still about money, just a different type of money. I don't know. That comment that you made me think a lot. Just, it seems like that stuff could be pretty solved. That crisis in itself, like the plastics. You always hear about the recycling and everything else. I think that there will be pretty easy solutions to that, but obviously the people who have anything to do with it don't have any interest in making something good out of it.
So I think there's a lot of in the same way that there's a lot of greenwashing, right? There's a lot of corporations that come in and they know, they see that there's going to be a social movement, right? And so they make their own version of that thing that provides a solution that is better than what they're doing potentially, but still allows them to profit off of it, right? And they can fund these things in the same way that sometimes, like with Amazon, for instance, here here in Tennessee. They had a right-wing union literally come in to counter the regular union, just to so just to break it, like, and create so there'll be no union eventually. You know what I mean? That was their whole goal, was the union bust, essentially. But they so they presented themselves as a union, and so you have a lot of these corporate entities that will come in and essentially, greenwash situations. Now, on top of that, I think earlier I was talking about how a lot of these folks in the environmental movement haven't thought things through in terms of, I think that there's a certain amount of, and Jacob talked to this a little bit, I think, that, Lennon said we don't need to, just go around destroying stuff. We need to re-seize it. You know what I mean? And for white folks who have had the power in the United States for a long time, I think that there's a certain, and I think that this is a self-critique of myself. We see our government, as all governments like this, right? That our colonized state, this way of life, is the way of life that would be, under different circumstances, right? That there's some sort of normalness to it, right? And so, in lieu of land back, in lieu of developing reparations, in lieu of developing seizure of the means of production by the working class, they'd say just destroy it. And that has a certain amount of entitlement to it, right? Like, for people who have been working for a long, long time to have representation within a thing, and you're saying, okay, we're just going to destroy the whole thing instead. I think that hits people a certain way. You know what I'm saying? And that's what a lot of these deeper ecologists, environmentalists, anti-civ people are. You know what I mean? They're saying, like, let's destroy the whole thing. And I think that puts people who are already oppressed and already weak under this state, in terms of representation and power. You know what I mean? In terms of being oppressed, that puts them in an even a more chaotic state where they don't where people might be again, like the white power might seize a power vacuum and really hurt people in a way that they wouldn't be able to under even the current liberal state.
That is absolutely crazy. But it's always, I saw that a very consistent sentiment in the interviews, that who's to say that even if we tear down the system that we got now, that we just don't rebuild another one, another plutocracy or something. I mean, there's nothing that really, if you go in with that sort of a mind, I mean, it's very possible. Yeah.
And then people are going to use that against you. Like, look at these leftists who just like blew up a dam or a power grid or whatever. It just doesn't seem like, it seems like a last case scenario in a very desperate moment sort of kind of situation versus this should be our ideology. You know what I mean? Like if nothing else works, and then like saltwater fish are about to go extinct, I can see that being like, well, you got to do something. You know what I mean? Like blow the Death Star. You know what I'm saying? But like, it's like, but that's not exactly, it's not like that in real life. There's so much more nuance, and there's so much more things we can actually accomplish. And the fact that these folks are oftentimes very anti-communist, I wouldn't say they're anti-communist in the sense of like, they're pro-communist, but it's not actually existing communist countries. As long as they lost,
they're against the post-colonial world. That's what they're. Well, and an example of like what I want to, is where it's kind of racist. This like where environmental like narratives get turned into racism, is what what you'll see, for example, with China. China. Oh yeah. Repeatedly makes a good example of kind of the Western racist view of every sort of issue. Like it's but you'll hear them say, "Oh, China leads the world in emissions. Out of all countries, they lead the world in emissions." They go, "Oh, it must be because they just can't control what they're doing out there, and because and they don't got a grip on things. Like they can't control what the government does, and so everything that bad happens is China. Like Oh and so that's what the media is now. But the whole but you look at it, the thing though, what people forget is that China makes up a fifth of the world's population. It's a whole fifth of it. So, but when you look at their carbon emissions, it is not a fifth of the world's population. And so like they're like, it tends to be that they're like you ask, well, why would people in China do this and do that? It's like, why would they? How are they being aggressive? Like, oh, they're trading with these new countries and are leading economic development. Well, yeah, because China has like a fifth of the world's population. Of course, they're going to have a lot of production. Of course, they're going to have a lot of people and trade with people and development. They don't have a single drone strike today. Like they don't have any drone strike on another country. They don't actually coerce people. there's a mutual agreement there. And then we've never seen China actually coerce people into their policies like the US, and they, in Syria and Iraq and Somalia and Libya, and you just go on and on and on, Vietnam, and the whole but it's like their whole solution is like, oh no, well, China's big. That's what China's bad is, because they have a lot of people. And that's where they get all their power from, is a lot of, well, what's your solution there? And they don't want to say, because they don't have a solution to that. It's as if, no, China needs less people. There needs to be less people in China. Like that's kind of their whole solution.
They're planting that seed in your head already.
Yeah, it's a remnant of the British Empire that would push this narrative even in the 1800s that the problem is that there's too many people. There's too many people out here. And so if there's things like wars, oh, well, that's cool. Like colonialism, if they did this and that, and it kills people off, well, that means more for the rest of it. It's a disgusting ideology. That means we get to exist here and live in a less polluted environment. Like, and you even saw this with the sanctions with Russia, like completely, not understanding how much that would do to all the rest of the world, the entire.
Oh yeah, I was just going to get to that.
How much that split would tear people apart from, whether it be from Venezuela to, which, I mean, the U.S. put so many sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba, but even, countries in Africa, countries in Asia, so the Ukrainian state has had not been able to find any support from African leaders,
and they won't,
or Asian leaders.
Russia's never invaded, and that's the thing too. A lot of the people, we're in such a Western bubble as it is. I mean, you're basically talking about the G10 nations or whatever you want to call them. You have these. It all goes back to geopolitics. They're global gangs, and you have the UK, you have the United States, Western Europe, and then you have a handful of cherry-picked countries, because we basically we nuclearized Japan, and so we got Japan to unwillingly be a part of this alliance. And who's to say that the landscape, if shit really hit the fan, if Japan would actually side with this alliance anyway, considering that Russia, China, India, you have all these major countries that have a lot to say about the world, and say we don't ever get that aspect. I mean, Africa, we never talk about Africa, and people in Africa that I talk to say that, well, fuck it, Russia's never bombed us. I mean, and the Russian sanctions are actually hurting us because of our wheat production and stuff. That's killing out. That's making that shit go up here, and Europe is not necessarily going to be a good thing for Europe. I mean, long term, if this shit continues, this is not going to be good for Europe. I mean, it's just going to be a sabotage for Europe, and then they're going to wonder, why did I sign off on this in the first place? Is this hurting Russia or is it hurting us?
Yeah, and that was what they sold it as when it happened. Was, oh well, this will it puts the sanctions on all of Russia's carbon emission, all of Russia's carbon, fossil fuel industry. Like, it will help the environment. It's like, again, like, who started this war in the first place? Who's not like, who's not trying to develop anything to replace our carbon emissions? We don't have we constantly have to. We don't have any public transportation that can get everybody at once. It's got to be. That's not an option. It has to be. You need a car. You got to buy a new car, because the old cars are designed in a way where you can't keep using them. There's going to be, it's a whole, it's never on our corporations. It's always away from them. It's like our corporations are inevitable. The rest of the world has to pay for everything else, and our corporations just get to keep, doing what they're doing. Yeah, it was the whole. There was no consideration for what that would do, to the rest of the world. But they sold it as it was an environmental thing. Sanctions, like, that's so happy, and like, economical sanctions, like that's how they like sold it in 2022.
I'm going to plug this book in, and we're going to definitely continue the conversation. I probably have about a half hour or so longer to go for some more dynamic conversation, but I want to plug this book in. It's called Flashpoint in Ukraine: How the U.S. Drive for Hegemony Risk World War III. This was published in 2014. It's 25 essays. I think it would please the audience to get a different perspective on this whole situation with Ukraine and Russia. And I think it would definitely, if you look at the reviews, it's crazy how people look at things when they were written. Like the time means a lot, like when things were published. And so 2014, this was published, and just the whole mindset. You should see the mainstream media narratives around Ukraine in 2014. They were villainizing the hell out of Ukraine in 2014. Like all of the major legacy media outlets were all talking shit about Ukraine. And now that they've leveraged Ukraine to mean something else, this book has an even deeper meaning to it from 2014. But I definitely think it's important um, to kind of go into what you all have been saying the whole time, that these stated narratives are very versatile in the sense that they do change with the times when they have to, and then they keep driving in the same political points over and over again when they have to as well. So they're definitely listening to somebody. They're getting information from somebody in order to counter what other people are saying against them. So they're not as dumb as they may seem. They're definitely selling a lot of shit to people. And so it's mindful that we also, as Jay was saying, just don't even follow that stuff at all. Get back to reading books, because there's so much stuff out there to support what we've been saying the whole time about these narratives that they want to sell people all the time. It's just a matter of breaking away from those chains of complacency is what I call them.
Yeah, and 2022 was scary at the beginning of 2022 when you knew what was going on in Ukraine, and you saw the amount of how the Ukraine flag was like everywhere. It had never done that before. It was as if the defense contractors that sponsored all that were like, it showed where all they were. It showed where all they, like, where their money was, how it could reach here and there and get people to say this and that, to the point to where it was like in the Grammys, where it was at the NFL draft, where the Congress all had, you got to see everywhere with that blue and yellow flag, where they had their hand in, right, where somebody had to possess someone's spirit, in a sense. Like it was but more and more people are going to realize, as they do read more and they do learn more, there's going to be more and more uncovered, especially with the internet and the informational era. They always say, oh, you do your research online. Well, it's like, yeah, you're supposed to research things online and understand all sides of things, to draw a conclusion from it. It was weird how that was always kind of like looked down on, like if you I mean, and yeah, there's people who believe silly things that are dumb, and then they end up paying for it usually, like like end up doing something that wastes their life or something. When you're looking for when you're looking for all sides of things and you're studying on all sides of things, there's going to be obvious conclusions. You're gonna say, wow, our government or our media was really lying about this. Everybody got to see how dishonest our media was during this time. And it was kind of like people don't realize where things come from. They don't realize how it got here in front of their face.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you see people who were like having Black Lives Matter signs in 2020 also have, the Ukraine flag in 2022. And in their mind, it's like it's both here. It's just some mutual human spirit brought it here, and it's but they don't realize that it was put here by two different things. That one, yeah, maybe even corporations had to put Black Lives Matter on their stuff because people were tired. They were exhausted. That was the largest demonstration in U.S. history. Never before had people in the United States been more united over an issue. It was to the point to where there was massive, 350,000 people at one time in Philadelphia. You had those demonstrations all across these small little communities out in the country, that never seen anything political before ever. So they thought like, well, that was like the current thing. They just saw it as the current thing. They weren't sure how it got there. And then you see them, you kind of see these corporations try to forage on it and try to be like, oh, see, it's the more like their slogan was Ukraine matters. That was their big slogan before 2022.
Wow.
There's a lot of things like that where, this matters, that matters. They started saying, what's his name? Blinken gets up on there and goes, American leadership matters, like he said that in turn of 2022. A lot of things where they started saying matters, nobody really kind of caught them. They were just like, we're going to go along with and use this leverage of like people who only see this as like who thinks that, like, who aren't really thinking about what they see and where it comes from, particularly how it got where it is. In the case of the BLM movement, it was that across the entire country, you had a similar incident everywhere. It had been suppressed to just the local unrest, But when something happened, like Jay was talking about earlier, George Floyd was particularly known. He had gone to done music. He was with Screwed Up Click. We got like original Screwed Up Click CDs that were here. My friend does that. They used to get out car shows. It's a real organic following network that they had. So all those people said, "Oh, it's big. Look at Big Floyd. Like this is Big Floyd. He's getting like." And they show the video, right? And they have all these memories of him, seeing him in show and stuff that pulled on heartstrings, and that made people mad. They're like, it hit those strings more, and more people were. So they couldn't stop it. They couldn't stop the amount of people who were sharing it. They immediately just embraced it. They're like, well, we have to do something. Like even conservatives were talking about defunding the police, like even as being a thing. But once they could grab leverage again, it was that like the conservatives really opposed it really hard, and the Democrats were like, come on, we just can't keep up, like let's hurry, let's just try to get Trump out, and that's good enough, and that's kind of it was the
absurd, yeah.
It was the back and forth, it was a back and forth between the people and the corporations. At the end of the day, it's what it continues to be. That's how we get this. But by 2022, you see a lot of these same people be like, oh well, a lot of the corporate sponsored stuff that said Black Lives Matter, they're now putting this flag in front of me, so this must be something important. And and Russia and Trump, right? So Trump, because the world's based around our politics here in the U.S. It's kind of I don't know. It's a matter of explaining where things come from to people, where it actually their origins and their differences in that way.
And that's really hard sometimes. I mean, I remember when I was working with the Bradley County Incarcerated Resolutions group, there was somebody in our group who started sharing stuff, that seems very innocuous and good, like Save the Children or whatever, but you find out like what that organization is actually about, and like, then you go, oh, okay, that's like, and so they'll just see that they see any good cause and they're like, I want to jump on that. And the corporations know this, and then they create things in the language of the people, and then they continually weaken people to the point where they're not able to express their true voice, and then they bring a voice in for them. You know what I mean? And they say this is what they're saying, even though that's not at all what was being said.
Jay, I had a question about. There seems to be an attitude going back to this idea of revolution again. Is it something that's just idealistic, or is this something that, are we just one event away from? There's just been this drastic shift of consciousness to something that they never envisioned before. And that's what I thought about initially with the Floyd protests and stuff. Unfortunately, what I saw with those situations was, I thought there was an end game to it. And of course, they used that as an end game for their own agenda. The deep state did. And I figured that's what it was all about anyway. It had nothing to do with defunding the police. They didn't want to defund the police. They used that as a moment. They used the people's like true emotions against them. And then it's like, we're back to like the bullshit, the status quo, like it always was. How do we shift these kind of people we're trying to reach, like that we're surrounded with all the time? How do we get a lot of people at once to like gravitate to what we're trying to tell them about? When we're telling them about these different philosophies and how the state is just constantly exploiting the workers, and like, how do we get them to relate that to like, you guys are perpetuating that in your electoral process. There's no separating your benevolence from that. You are contributing to that even more, like the state's agenda. How do we get through to them?
I think that's a multi-pronged process. I think that first of all, there's a lot of tactics that one could use. You could do info campaigns where you put out things that directly hit people's minds and they can't unthink, and just put them out where you think working class people might be. You can do media, you can reach out through get with people and make contact with them, all over the place. You can do free stores, you can do tactics like mutual aid to help bring people into a local area, networking with people that in already existing groups that you feel like in your area have any sort of political engagement, going to your city council, all these, these things. But then, of course, in the end, we're gonna have to unify that in a certain way where we're developing a network of people who are able to go into their local area and cultivate things that cadres and stuff that can develop a regional, that can develop a national body, that can have contact with unions, that can have contact with all these things. That would be the eventual thing, I think, would be to organize, organize as well as they are, and to set about demands that can't be capitulated, and to set about, instead of asking them to do it for us, doing it ourselves, but doing it in such a way that's not just spontaneous and that it can't be capitulated because it has a forward momentum. But and so I think that that there isn't that organ yet. You know what I mean? There's many different, but I think that the focus on developing that organ that could do that is a big part of I think what we need to be working on right now is to develop some sort of organ that can our local level, find what the will of the people is, take those victories and then take them regionally as much as we can, and then take them nationally as much as we can, and build up from there, along with building worker power and building towards that general strike. And that's going to take, all sorts of things, but getting into the public conscious, being where the people are at, wherever it's, like, if it's Facebook comments, if it's on major news networks where you can say something that just, hits, if you can hit the right way, where it's like it doesn't appear, on those situations, I would almost want to not appear ideological, appear as less loaded with words, that might be Pavlovian, in nature, and put them, or not nature, but in orchestration, but and then develop and put something that hits the idea of that we have a natural dictation over production. If we say no, that's it. If we say yes, that's it. I mean, the only way that they've been able to coerce us is by controlling the violence of the state. You know what I mean? And so I would say that Jacob, I would like to hear your thoughts on it.
I was going to ask Jacob, how do we avoid a situation where, when we get too close to those to the broker class, because obviously if we're going to be connecting to so many people, we're also going to be connecting in a way with the broker class. And so how do we keep those interests intact without some sort of a monetary compromise from the outside getting into this coalition building?
Well, I mean, ultimately it's to explain the way that I think that what we need is for people to understand an alternative to what we have now. We have we have a corporate democratic system, in that, who the corporation, which is what, somebody's going to own a chain of different productions. It's going to accumulate more and more. Somebody's going to win the market, right? Like and it's going to go towards a small group of owners. And they basically decide, we get to show up every 2 years, 4 years, vote on somebody, that their parties pick out, that corporate parties pick out, who are always answering to, they're funded by the corporations they're going to have to, we pick out between those two people, and then they get to go have lobby meetings, and they get to, the corporations pay pay everything that they're doing, right? Like, and they have to keep answering to that if they, their party will turn against them or something, and I was listening to your last guest talking about how hard it is for a third party to run, and that they pass all these extra silly laws about, like, you have to, like, I think in Missouri, you have to ask somebody who's already elected if to sign off if you can run. And so no third parties get to run in Missouri, because you have to ask a Republican or a Democrat, because that's what the corporations wanted, and it was that's how they're able to maintain that. And it's this is the alternative that's been throughout history. And one is like, ultimately that extra ownership has to not be there, because it's only going to have an interest and keep doing what it's doing. It has it's only going to gain more and more political, since it's only a political ownership, it's only there by policy, it's only going to try to gain more and more political power through a means of a state, through means of coercion, and to enforce its policy. But this is the alternative, is that what we call centralized democracy. An alternative is there's a new level of democracy, which is the local council, right? It's the not just the local, it's the, not like a city council, right? Not like a city hall, but even say if you got a hospital of people. We saw so much commotion during COVID about this and that and all stuff that nurses they all know, they all actually understand. They went to go get, college degrees to be a nurse, but there was a bunch of confusion back and forth that they didn't get to resolve, because no matter what, it was whoever owned the hospital decided. It was whoever, that one person got to decide this and that. But and so they go, oh no, they're like, no, they're not the experts. They have the money. That's how they have the money to be able to do that. You have a larger group of consciousness among everybody in a hospital. But if they were able to have elect a council, right, that could then they elect a delegate from their council. They give all their they have their concerns represented to the next level, which is like a local level, a local council. From there, the local council, among, say, not just the hospital, but factories, maybe agricultural co-ops, different, however somebody wants to form a council, they elect delegates too. That delegate goes to a local council, who then goes to a state level, who that local council elects to a delegate to a state level, and there's a state level council, right, who then elects somebody to the National Assembly, which is across the entire country. And the National Assembly is who passes laws, right? That's something we don't have, but that's how the Soviet democracy works. That's how democracy works in China. That's how, and this is the very important part about all of that, is that any time you can legally recall your elected delegate from your council. So say, you don't like who your city council is voting up, right, to the state, who's representing your state. You're like, I don't like that, but your council or your delegate from your council keeps voting for them. You can argue why they need to not, and you could have a recall and say, all right, we need somebody else to come in. They say, yeah, you make good points about why we don't need to do that. You make good points about other things. Let's run them. Who wants to have them? Okay. And you could do that at any time. There is no waiting 2 to 4 years. That's how it is in those countries. It's a new form of democracy, and like that, how do you lobby that out? How would you, even if there was somebody there with a bunch of money, with a bunch of court, like, how would you be able to lobby out all of those different councils on local levels that have that all the way to the top, have all the way to the National Assembly that can elect representation all the way there? How do you lobby all that? You couldn't possibly do it.
I tell you, it sounds very opposite. That sounds very anti-incrementalist, and which is great. I mean, because that's exactly the opposite of what they do here. They prolong things as much as they need to, unless it's within their interest. And then, like I was telling Tyler, they just accelerate the shit out of it when they want to, when they feel needed. And then they just slow it down absolutely to the lowest denominator whenever they feel fit to. But that seems like that would cut out a lot of that bureaucratic mess that happens in Washington. That seems like a very viable solution to that.
And it's what it's, and the way it starts is organizing now where people can, like, even if somebody's not entirely of the same ideology of you, if you can, or if they have a same interest in their community, like they want more development, say, if you're out in the rural areas where maybe somebody's like not the most politically conscious, but everyone's on a well out there, knowing that like there's all this money going to the police stations in the cities, like that the people in the city don't want that. You could go see a American city council across the whole country, and the city council, they'll just tear into the city council one after another over Zoom, and the city council will just be like, all right, well, we'll pass it anyway. Pass like a $30 million police station in a town that's like 80,000 people. The people in the city don't want that. But even if you live out in the country and you're like, yeah, and you demand, you get people to organize and start demanding for this system, for these corporations to clean their own mess up, and start demanding, by their government, grabbing their state and making, demanding of them to do it, that's what we call practicing their dictatorship. Even if you live in a poor rural community, they don't have any political consciousness, political power. If they gain experience by organizing and seeing, like, yeah, let's explain why we need to have water, out to our community, and not just be on this well, right? Let's explain why. Let's say you have something like, there's tons of different things to organize the community for, but those are the building blocks of what centralized democracy is when, because at this point we're so used to having the owner, the what I call the deadweight ownership, be the boldness of us, be the political boldness. We're so used to that, or like working class people especially are very used to that they're timid. They're like, well, I don't know if I should do. And that's kind of the thing, is they don't have confidence because they don't have consciousness of their real political power. But by getting them organized, it sets the blocks. Even if there's not something to unite, like what I was talking about, a full centralized democratic system, the National Assembly, if anything, but having people prepared by organizing them, it's a lot easier to assemble that way. It becomes a lot easier to assemble. And explaining this alternative, everybody's tired of corporate democracy. Hardly, something like 20% of people approved of the last Congress and last year. But yet Biden apparently had the best turnout of any president at the midterms. So it's not like everyone was like, oh, we want a Republican, like everybody was really like tired of this Congress, but nobody really wanted a Republican either. It wasn't like they all showed up to vote for Republicans. It's that everybody doesn't believe in this corporate democracy anymore, and that there has to be a people's democracy, for the people and by the people, and that has power all the way to the National Assembly. I think explaining this alternative to people is kind of the next step. Explaining the alternative of so it's not so aimless in their work. They don't see it's pointless to organize. That they won't have any power there. Letting them know that they do have a power. It's not be misanthropic and have faith in the people. To actually have it. And not just not let it, and not just be phrases. It'd be actual. A result, the end result, it be shown in action. Somebody who could do that will inevitably be who there is to lead the people. That's the
where does mutual aid come into play with this centralized democracy? And Jay, if you want to also speak on this, because you mentioned mutual aid several times just from this interview and the previous one. Where does that come into play when we try to, would this be a transition, or is this something that would be able to coexist within what we already have to work with, this centralized democracy?
So I think dual powered, both the power of what we can do in terms of sharing with each other, in terms of what we already, like what we can do in terms of alleviating, or giving people more free time by, doing things together, whatever we can do, buying things and saving people gas money and cost for buying in bulk, whatever small things we can do that those two things, right? That shows solidarity, of class solidarity, of this isn't charity, we're working together, we all are valuable, and then secondarily, the dual power nature of the yes, it's a temporary thing, because eventually you'd be to exponentiate those things through the means of production by developing those things that were directly for and by the worker, as opposed to for and by the capitalist class and for the profit of them. So eventually you wouldn't necessarily need a mutual aid program because you'd have free food. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, or you wouldn't necessarily need a couch share sort of like process in your neighborhood because it's just free housing. You know what I mean? Like, but so that was kind of, that's like what transitioned me from anarchist, honestly, to communist, was the idea that we can just exponentiate all these things if we had the power that they do. But unless we have the power that they do, we won't be able to. Anything we do will be crushed. Anything that we do accomplish could be crushed. Not necessarily will be, but if it ever approaches anything that could like radically change anything, it will be.
Is that the reason why mutual aid seems very ineffective at times now? Is that just a mismanagement of the aid itself, or is it just because infrastructurally speaking, is just almost like you're burning money to like keep money flowing, but it's not going to what it's intended to go to.
It depends on the situation, right? I mean,
Okay.
I think that like it, I think that first of all, we have way less resources than the capitalist class does. We have way less resources than churches do. We have less resources than nonprofits. So, I think that, and then I think that needs is continuous. You know what I mean? Contributions aren't. And so like even if you, let's say, met the needs of like immediate needs of like 50 people, you know what I mean? That and your money's gone. It's like next week those 50 people are still gonna be needing. You know what I mean? It's not. You know what I'm saying? So even if you do manage it exactly like properly, you know what I mean? It's not. It's not going to go as far as it could. Especially so because we don't have that kind of money. You know what I mean? It's really a stopgap measure. It's just and it's a cost risk analysis in a certain way. Like, do we put a lot of our time, effort, and resources into it's like triage, right? It's like to a certain extent, to a certain there's a mass triage of it. If there's a doctor with a broken arm, you want to set that person's arm so they can go and help you with other people who are if somebody's has a gunshot wound that's probably fatal. It would seem like you'd want to focus on them first, but in those kind of situations, it's like do we spend 2 hours fixing this person when like 5 or 6 other people who could have been actually saved, lived, like been taken evacuated or whatever. It's a hard call. These are like kind of things, but I think that setting up those networks develops community contact. And so it's almost like a protest, right? Like the protest is a great place to network. You know what I mean? Even if it's not necessarily for a thing that you care about, whatever, so much. Like if it's something that's like, let's say that you feel is like for a local candidate that you don't necessarily, or like at least going there at the very least, to a demonstration or whatever it might be. You get to network with people and talk to them. Anywhere the people are, you want to go. To a certain extent, and kind of be there. And so I think that, and developing places for people to be is going to be the thing that develops the local cadre, and local assembly.
I tell you, some of the stuff that y'all are talking about, and Jacob, I definitely want to get your view or response to what Jay just mentioned. There's some people, and I don't normally do this. Like I actually don't. If you look at any of the episodes before, I'm never going to go into this realm of clout chasing like other YouTubers, podcasters. Like I see this stuff happening way too much to where it's like one side is trying to cannibalize the other side and trying to one up the other side. But I will mention that there's some channels that are kind of concerning me a little bit that I used to follow that are almost appropriating the language that we're talking about here. I haven't heard it mutual aid used as a stopgap measure a lot. Like you go to some of these YouTube channels, it's like they almost want to keep talking about mutual aid, just building off of it like it's some sort of a perpetual situation. And I've always questioned, like, how is that even possible for the flow to just keep coming in from just like everyday citizens anyway? I mean, and they're operating under this very neoliberal mindset anyway. And so I'm like, is this a serious approach, Like I get trying to like raise some funds like here and there, but it almost seems like there's just so much emphasis on it and it's concerning in a way. And to me, that almost leads to some sort of a like where's the money actually going? Like it almost makes me question where's the money going if that's so much of the dialogue that's going on. Because like you said, a stopgap measure that makes sense. It seems like that's what it's meant to do. Like it's not supposed to be like a situation that's ongoing all the time. And so I'm glad that you said that because that just sort of confirms my suspicions that I had before of some of these outlets that I'm not going to mention. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Jacob, I had a question about what's this media outlet that you're thinking about like you're starting to create? Because we discussed a few ideas before we got on camera. And Jay, I also want to hear about you getting kicked out of the radio show. Like, I mean, I know that this is almost like mainstream type shit. I mean, but I mean, the audience do need to kind of get, into the know of what happened with that. And it's not like in a tabloid sort of way, because no one wants that kind of stuff to happen, obviously. But it does have a deep meaning as far as like why you got kicked off the radio show. But Jacob, you first, like, what is your media aspiration about?
Oh, well, I mean, we're looking to, so as of now, I have a YouTube channel that I do called Marxist.
Marxist Saw, okay.
Yeah, it's got, I think, over 350 writings that are Marxism, and it's historical stuff, right? Historical theory for people that want to actually learn what it's about. What did they actually say? What are they saying? Like, you don't have to go, people don't have to come in and see it as like, they're not, it's not manipulative stuff, right? They can come in and just think critically, and hear what they're saying. And, that's on that will actually explain what happened throughout history. There'll be a whole new understanding of history that actually is there that we're just suppressed from. That's the channel I do. It's called Marxist. It's like Arkansas, but Marxist, MARXISTSAW. But also for anybody who wants to be on the lookout, we don't have the channel set up yet, but we're gonna work on another media project called Alienated Press. It's and we have different there's going to be different stuff coming from there, but there'll be conversations like what we're having now. There's going to be a lot of it'll be involving more people than my channel I have, which is just me reading, and sometimes I talk to some people now and then on there, but not really. But this new one's called Alienated Press. If somebody wants to follow me at Marxist, I'll let people know when it comes out, and when we have the channels up and stuff.
Do you actually? So your Marxist Saw channel is actually up and running right now?
Yes, it is.
And when did you start that?
I think I started it at the end of either 2021 or at the beginning of 2021 or 2020. I might have around then. I think it was beginning of 2021. I began Marxist, and it's because I just started reading, and so I was like, well, I'm going to go ahead and record it anyway, so other people can know what it is. Because I thought, if nothing else, like the amount of people our government has killed over for being communists, the amount of bombs that they've dropped. They made Laos the most bombed country in human history. To this day, you can't go walk in a field in Laos because there's the danger of a bomb. It's all because there's communism. This thing called communism, this word, like the thing that we're supposed to be real terrified is there. But what is it? What is communism? They murdered a fifth of Korea. That's what made, during the Korean, just stop communism, right? Murdered a fifth of the Korean peninsula. These are things that you're like, well, what exactly is this? Why can't we just hear what they're saying? Can we just hear? Is that cool? Don't we need to know what all of our grandparents got drafted for, and we have to carry all this generational trauma after that? Wouldn't it be nice to know what exactly communism was, why they had to go all the way over to, and then you realize, wait, there's some extreme dishonesty here about what this is. Even if everybody agrees with something or not, it's not this hostility. It's going to be stuff that we could see here in our life, that we could see go around now, and that's ultimately what I do on Marxist. And it's a different approach than what people will have of Marxism, like you say, you're a libertarian, a left libertarian. I was graduated high school. I was all about Ron Paul, and I was a libertarian, and it's because he was like against the war on drugs. He was against the drone strikes, and I'm like, well, that's obviously correct, but there's a lot more similarity, and I think that's an important thing to understand is what actually is similar between even our society we have now and socialist society. That's a lot of the stuff you can find on my channel, but the new channel will also be through. I could let everybody know through my channel once we put out our new channel.
Yeah, no doubt. I'll definitely supply the links and everything. And I was telling Jay, like, the previous episode, I don't like to box myself too much. You know, that's just the simplest way to sort of explain things to people. Libertarian in the sense that, you know, I obviously believe in personal body autonomy and stuff like that, but not necessarily from like a market standpoint. That it just like there's a lot of stuff. It's like you almost have to like not interview me, but just like if there's an issue, I would tell you my position on the issue, and it would probably lean more libertarian and less authoritarian. I don't like the coercion of any sort of entity, you know, when it's not necessary. Just I mean, the medical industry, for instance. I mean, we've had the situation going on the third year into that, and a lot of my friends didn't understand where I was coming from when it came to that. I'm like, well, that's another one of those issues. I mean, you have a medical industry, and then you have a question, an ethical question. You know, should a person be able to decide that for themselves or not? And I decided that I should be able to decide that for myself. You know, and you know, without being condemned by it. But then you have all these unfair comparisons, you know, to other things, and that makes you something. So I guess that's what I mean by it. I still don't quite understand um the labels. I'm definitely going to follow your channel and read into the literature that you have, um, because I definitely don't claim to be a person that's really heavy into theory and ideology, um, because my lived experiences have been a good guidance for me. But that can only enrich my lived experiences even more, like actually delving into the literature more. I had a question for Jay as far as like Guillotine Press. Is that still a thing? Because you were a co-founder, right?
Yeah, I was the me and Jared Cochran co-founded that about 4 or 5 years ago. We put out about 55 pieces, including media and stuff like that. At first, we were we had about 30 people on there. And then I told everybody to stop because because of COVID, I was going to stop putting out stuff for a little while. And so right now we only have like 2 people, but Jacob has released stuff on there as well. And we've it is still a thing, sort of, but right now I think we may even use that page to like just transition straight over to Alienated Press or whatever. We may create a new one or something like that. But I want to keep it open because it has my book Voices of Fire or Voices for Fire on there in a form where you don't have to go through Amazon and you can pay what you want. Plus you get 55 other things, you know, that are art,
Oh gosh, I
music.
wish I would have known that. No, it's all good. It's all good. I'll redirect people. You have to send me the site and everything so I can send me the link to that. And then I can, and the same for you, Jacob, and then I can link everything into the podcast descriptions for people to see. I, so tell us briefly what happened. This Alan Jones guy kicked you and your other comrades off of the radio show. What was that about? Because it seemed like everything was going just fine. Like we did the interview back in July, I think, and you were like this Trump affiliated person. This fucker let me have, you know, like rent a building or whatever, and we played some gigs or whatever. We basically like had to suck it up and listen to some shit that we didn't want to listen to, and then we got the, you know, the space to promote our stuff, and all of a sudden he just came in and said like, the hell with this stuff?
So I think so there was already a radio station. It's a nonprofit radio station. It's called Whoop FM, and it's local here, but you can find it online and stuff. But I wouldn't really recommend it. There's basically most of the time they play Southern gospel and like older stuff. And so like Appalachian music, some of it being very good, though actually. And so but then they have like one radio DJ. They have like that's on more than one day a week. Everybody else is like a once a week show. There's like a really uber patriotic show where this guy comes in. It's American flag background. He's wearing all American flag clothes, and he's been doing that show for like 15 years. There's another dude who's in there, and he's just he'll make really racist Asian accents and stuff. And like reportedly called his co-host the N-word at one point.
Oh my God.
Wow. At any given time, whenever they're not having people on air, it's just a Trump flag, It has like it's so like they already have political content, right? They already have that. And so my point, like when I first came in there, I was like, I basically just I was doing a show with Sound Bandits, and the guy who hosted it happened to be there, and I just took my shot and just asked, hey, I heard y'all are having morning DJs or needing more DJs. We'd be happy to do it. And he's like, what do you want to talk about? And I'm like, we'll play indie music and talk about civics. And that's all I said. And so I knew it was inevitable that this was going to come to an end, that this is a temporary process.
Oh, so you knew that for sure.
Oh yeah. And so but like we were volunteer, but we could get sponsorship from people. We were allowed to go out and get sponsorship. We were supposed to give like 20% to them or whatever, but it's Alan Jones. He's like the richest person in Cleveland. I was like not worried about that. So like we had like some people Devin Cervatus from Mutual Aid Disaster Relief helped us out. And we promoted his stuff and read some of his writings from his Patreon and things. And but eventually we were asked to stop talking about political stuff, like at one point, like about
when did that happen?
Maybe 3 weeks before we got kicked off. But we were at late night then, and we figured like nobody'd be really. We were doing late night shows then, and so I was just talking about the strikes whenever this happened. We maybe had a 2-week absence because I just hadn't been feeling well, and then we came back in and we just had like it was like we came in at like midnight and brought in like we're just talking about railroads, the strikes, and I was talking about how like Biden should be a union buster and all that, and like. And
you would think that they would suck that shit up though. Like you were talking about Papa Joe.
Yeah, exactly.
You would think that they would love that, right?
Yeah, I even saw Let's Go Brandon. And like so
they love Biden when he works in their class interests,
Yeah, so like a few minutes
around. We're supposed to divide over Trump and Biden, not them.
That's ridiculous. I'm just when you put that on Facebook, I was like, they closed Jay's like showdown because of that. Like, really? Like, because I know you've been saying political stuff on there before that. Like, there had to be, like, they just seem very abrupt. But that,
I think Alan Jones started to realize what we were saying and stuff, and we never talked about him directly until the very end. Once they came in, so somebody came in and was like, "Hey, Alan's saying you got to go now," and like, so I went back in there while my other friend talked to him, and I like talked about how you need to go on like followthemoney.com and look up Alan Jones and see where his money's coming from. He promotes a lot of conservative radio, but he won't let you talk about Marxism. He'll let another DJ say the N-word and make Asian like accents and talk about whatever politics he wants to, but you can't talk about Marxism. Racism's okay, Marxism isn't. And I was like, everybody, think about what you've heard in these last 5 months, and does it appeal, or does it do you think this is more in your interest or whatever they're feeding you on the major media channels? And like,
did they get aired?
Oh yeah. And then I cut the radios off. I cut all the radios off and unplugged the equipment and then left.
Oh my God, that is some crazy shit.
Well, so okay, now here's the thing. I would have stayed in there and got arrested. I was down to like lock myself in and shit. It's just that I had my friends with me, and one of my friends was trans, and I didn't want to put them in any sort of danger. And but that was the plan, or it was like that when they came in to do that, I was gonna be like, no, you'll have to arrest me, and get them to arrest me, and like just not like violently or anything, just be just civil disobedience or whatever. That way I would have to make the news. You know what I'm saying? And
oh yes,
yeah. So
the guy Alan Jones, he's the one that did, what do you call it, cash a check. It's very dishonest stuff he does. He's a very he's one of Trump's good friends that lives, like, owns that station and has all that go on there. Yeah, not a good person.
I commend you. I commend you though for I can't believe you got in. And it actually, lasted the way it did. I mean, that but I like it, hey. That was an end game. you kind of saw the fate coming, but I'm still like, I can't believe it was over the railroad strikes. I really can't. Like, is that what finally did it?
I mean, that was the thing we were talking about when the thing happened. You know what I mean? So that's the,
Mhm.
it's like it seemed like we had talked about a lot of other things. We even had played like full videos that were like second thought about Ukraine, about all kinds of stuff. We had played, all sorts of different Marxist videos. They explicitly said socialism in them. We played songs like we our theme song was "The Communists Have the Music" by They Might Be Giants. We played that like every single show, and then we also did like jokes and stuff. Whenever we would do the weather, he would just like give this like very vague just it's like it's dark outside or whatever, and like and we do the traffic, and he would like, we don't have a helicopter, we spill our money promoting our band via sheet music. And I was like, I think that was a waste of money. Like we flew a plane over that had our sheet music on it. um didn't we didn't think it worked very well. It was probably a waste of money, but so like that, we were joking a lot of the time, trying to make it funny, trying to make it, play good music, that we thought that was like, cutting edge and interesting. We also played like old school stuff that was like, Appalachian based, and was like worker rights stuff, from Woody Guthrie to Johnny Paycheck, and like, you know, um, that dude who does Tennessee Ernie Ford, etc. Dolly Parton. So we played stuff that we tried to like, definitely cultivate for various different audiences. And I think it was a cool
Mhm.
show. Like, it was funny, it was informative, it had communism, it was edgy, like it had a lot of different stuff. Um, uh, and Casey's so funny, my co-host. So like, I think that it was a good show. I think that I'd love to be able to do that same thing. We're playing music, doing all that kind of stuff. Just speaking of the media organ, some of the ideas that we're running is that maybe doing a daily news show on TikTok, and then a weekly YouTube show, that would be a discussion
Yeah,
of those
I
things.
was just going to ask that. Like, it seems like that could develop into something else. Seems like you had an audience and everything.
And
And
we could do, yeah. So,
no, no, no. I was just going to say, how did people who you perceived as like not really been on board with the message? Did you get any feedback from those people?
we, it's hard to tell, you know what I mean, because it's a radio station that has like uh, it's a highly populated area, but not a very wide range, because LPFM, and it's online. So we had people who were, obviously on my Facebook were already probably positive towards the message, right? Whereas the people that were hearing it, they didn't really have a way of contacting me per se, and
Mm.
I was only hearing through the station management or other disc jockeys, like what might be said, and of course it's going to be from a conservative bent. So it's really hard to say
Oh, I
what the,
see.
you know what I mean? Which, if we would have had, if we already had this media organ available, that we could have used that to promote this was happening. You know what I mean? We could have talked about that. We could have maybe had people find out that, we could have had people comment. And there's a lot of ways we could have done this that I feel like maybe could have we could have been able to figure out that information. But I don't know. We just we're just kind of going with it and seeing it. I mean, yeah, I didn't think it was gonna last that long either.
Jacob, is there any last words you want to give to my audience? Any plugins or any final words?
Oh yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's a great show. And it's awesome that you have different people come on and say what they, and it's not you don't have to worry about the saying the wrong thing on here. That's definitely needed. And like Jay, we were just talking about now, the amount of censorship. It's a lot of people might have want to listen to that show, but they don't own check to cash or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
so I appreciate you having us on. If I can give a quote, it's probably my favorite quote from V.I. Lenin. It's about the state. He says, never believe in the superstition of the state, and always remember that in a democratic republic, and not just in a monarch, the state is just the machine for the suppression of one class by another. And that's he talks about, talking about even when the American Revolution happened, they had to create a new machine that could suppress the nobility, right? The monarch, the British monarch. But now there is a new, now there's a new class they have to suppress. The monarch's done. they're trying, and when they form, that could also seize a democratic republic in the same way the state would be a suppression of the original, the previous class before, just like the capitalists did to the feudal nobility, right? But that's probably one of my favorite quotes is never believe in the superstition of the state, and remember that in a democratic republic, and not just in a monarch, the state is just the machine for the suppression of one class by another. Yes.
And Jacob, if an audience member wanted to reach you in the most direct way, what would be a way that you would get through?
I'm on Facebook and Twitter.
Okay.
If they want to message me there. I don't know. I don't think YouTube has messaging. I'm not sure if it has messaging on YouTube.
They do. I think there's some sort of a trick. You have to go to the about page, and I think if you click there, there's like an automatic email address that appears where it says view email addresses, and you click it, and then it gives the email address that's provided.
Okay. Yeah, Marxist Saw is on Twitter and Facebook, so those two would be great. If anybody wants to message me, I'd love to talk to them. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. I want both of you back. Jay, the same for you. Do you have any final words? And I definitely want both of you back on the show later on in the season as well, if you all are more than gracious to do that.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having us. I don't really have anything profound or a quote and anything to say at the moment. Solidarity to everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for having us. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. It's been excellent.
No problem. I enjoyed this a lot. Is a very I won't say it was a hard decision. I've decided to continue with academia, but I've always like I tell my wife all the time, it's going to be on my terms. Like I don't give a damn. Like they can cancel me over a podcast or whatever. I'm going to continue to do this wherever I get hired as a job, because right now I'm in between. Like I'm just at home right now. I'm a stay-at-home parent, but I'm going to go in the job market, and I want to continue doing this as well. I'm trying to incorporate different kinds of people, like people in academic class, because I feel like these worlds never come together. It's the activism that they talk about is very much separate. Like the stuff that people are seeing on the ground is separated from what they're seeing. And I think that's almost intentional. Like it's like the professors that I know that have YouTube channels and stuff, it's just them talking to each other basically. They don't ever have like people on the ground that are like countering what they're saying to even, question what they're doing, in their comfy spaces in the offices and everything else. And so it's very corporatized. The education system is now, higher education. And that was very frustrating to me. And I knew that a lot of my views didn't align with a lot of my coworkers anyway. And so I was just like, you know what? This is a way to sort of connect to people outside of that world. And I don't want to disconnect completely from them, because I believe some of those people are good people, and maybe they will learn from people that are on the ground too. So I appreciate all the views, all my guests. And I don't know who we have next on the agenda, because there's so many people I'm booked up through April. So everyone continue to tune in to Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. We're available on all major podcasting platforms. I did reopen the YouTube channel a couple of months ago, even though they closed one of my videos down. That didn't discourage me. I reopened the channel so you all can subscribe there as well. And I'm on Spotify and all these other platforms. Have a great evening, beautiful people. Thanks again to Jay and Jacob. Have a great evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think, let's see, stop recording.